So I want to thank you guys for waiting. My name is Malaya Pearson. I am a textile print specialist here at IT Supplies, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. This webinar is our final session in our series entitled Knowledge is Power, and today we are joined by Michael Moon, EPSON Technical Sales Support Specialist. But before we get started, I would like to mention that all attendees will be muted throughout the webinar to reduce background noise. During the webinar, we do encourage you to feel free to type whatever questions that you have in the presenter chat box. And during that presentation, we will answer the Q&As during. So I will let Mike know that there are questions that come in throughout the presentation. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Mike Moon.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. As she mentioned, my name is Mike Moon, and I've been with EPSON for about 15 years. So I've been around a little bit, and before that, I actually worked in the graphic arts industry and working for a reseller, very similar to IT Supplies, but a little different industry. So I've been there, and I've been using RIPs for a good many years. So today, we're going to go through the EPSON Edge RIP software. This is going to be more of a walkthrough on the RIP. It's not going to be a PowerPoint demonstration. We're actually going to be running the software live for you guys to see. So as you see, we have it launched here is the RIP, fairly intuitive, easy layout, modern. So there are a couple things that we want to go through. We're going to go through bringing a file in, setting up the file for quality, for color settings and so forth. So let's just dive on in. To get into the RIP, when you launch the RIP, which does ship with the F6370, also ships with the F9470 and the 9470H. My demonstration is primarily going to be for the 6370, so I could go back and forth, but I'm going to focus primarily on that 6370 printer. Getting files into the RIP can be done via hot folder. So you drag a PDF file onto the hot folder, or you can just point to a specific file if you want to bring it in. So I can bring in a file here. As you see, we have an EPS file. It could be a TIFF, a JPEG. There's quite a lengthy list, and actually I could have left it there for just a few moments. So if you see supported files in the bottom right-hand corner, there's quite a few that are listed that are fully supported. So pretty much most of the files that you can, that you're familiar with using, you're going to be able to get these through the RIP to your printer. So when you bring a file in, it does take a little bit of time to process. We're actually running on a laptop today, so it's a little slower computer. So most people would have a little faster processing time than what we're seeing there. But taking a file that's already been brought in, I can look at the file. My file did come in. As you see, it's a scale here. That printer is currently set up for 44 inches of media. That file is 10 inches wide. That's why it is indeed filling up that 10-inch size that we see listed here. We do have the options of nesting files. We'll get back to some of these other things like nesting, but deleting a file, pretty common sense. RIP means I'm going to process the file, get it ready to go. So as soon as I hit print, it goes. I can also have the file go right to print, and it'll RIP and print all at one step. But some people prefer to have things ready ahead of time. Unhold, so if you have a job that's being held, it's not going to go anywhere, even if you do have it, trying to hit print, or you have your print automatically turned on, which is up here in the upper right-hand corner. So when a file has come in and you say go, it goes right away. So diving a little deeper into the actual program, I have a view in the top right-hand corner of my file. It gives me some statistical information, how big the file is, resolution, what's it set up for, what current media, that sort of thing. I can dive into basic settings. This is where we really kind of get into some of the more detailed specifications. So earlier I mentioned it's a 44-inch roll. That's because we had selected 44 inches under this dialog when the file was brought in. So we have it set up for different settings. There's profiles in here for rigid media, for soft fabrics as an example. So if I'm doing Chromolux panels as an example, Chromolux is a rigid media, coasters are a rigid media, that type of thing. Coffee mugs are a rigid media. The things here that are listed that are fabric are indeed typically fabric, soft. Could also be like a mouse pad would be a fabric because it's not rigid per se. So, and the numbers you see listed in front of it actually correlate to the paper that you're actually using. So EPSON has a couple of different thicknesses of papers. Some of the very thin medias are designed primarily for roll-to-roll applications where you're running a large calendar press. You're not touching each individual file. Like you're not printing a sheet, then cutting a sheet. You're running a long extended roll. So that's why some of these get really, really thin. This paper, the 50 gram media, as an example, is almost too thin to handle. You pick that up, you're going to get it pretty wrinkled just by picking it up. It creases really, really easily. We only really see that in very large production environments. You do have settings in here for bidirectional printing versus unidirectional. What bidirectional versus unidirectional is when the print head goes left and right, does it spray ink when it goes from left to right and spray ink when it goes from right to left? If you have unidirectional turned on, it's only going to spray ink in one direction, and then the other direction it's just going to do like a fast carriage return. So kind of like an old typewriter if you think of it that way. Resolution, this has to do with the input resolution. So input resolution is how much time and how much quality do I want? If I'm doing a photograph, if I'm doing fabric, typically you're not going to have real high resolution requirements. If you're doing a hard surface and you want to see a small type show up clean, that's where you may probably want to jump it up to the 720 dpi. Processing time is going to be a little longer, but you want that fine detail. Typically, fabric is not going to show you that fine detail. So in almost all situations for fabric, you're going to be 360 by 360. With some hard surface, you might be 360 by 360 or 720 by 720 if it does have that fine detail type or small, line art that you need to get through. You do have margins before and after the page if you need to. If the paper comes out a little wet, you can force a dry time. And once it's done being printed on this particular printer, it actually has a cutter. So I can have it print a job, then cut a job. Or in this case, I can also just turn it off so it prints and then it waits for the next file and then the next file. So you would have to manually go over and select cut on the printer itself. So those are our basic settings. Layout settings, if I click on this, so I'm taking my file, I want one copy of it. I can also select and go through that I want more copies of it. And as you can see, it's stepping out fairly easily. I can enlarge or reduce a file. So if I don't want them to be that 10 inches by 10 inches, which is actually typed in here 10 by 10, I can also tell it to scale to a certain size. So I want to scale it to 200%, or I want to scale it to, I'm just going to bring this down a second, back down to 1, or I can scale it to, say, 20 inches. Since these are tied together, when I select one, it automatically changes the other. If I deselected it, I could actually distort the image. So if I wanted, say, 25 by 20, you can see it actually distorts the image, which most people don't like when they do that for photography. So I'm going to change that one back. And then relink that up. Top left position, this is for coordinating, so I can force things to automatically be lower or higher, left and further left or further right. When a file does come in with dye sublimation, the whole process is we print onto a paper, then that paper is put face down onto your substrate. So we're reversing the image when we do actually go through the sublimation process. Because of that, we need to print our images reversed. So that's called mirroring the image, as we see here. So when I print the image, see if I take a logo as an example, the IT Supplies logo, I'll use something else here. You can see that logo is actually backwards, if you think of it that way. It is mirrored. So when it prints mirrored and you put it face down on your substrate, it will come out readable in the correct fashion. If you're using this RIP for, say, a solvent printer or something like that, or a photographic printer, you would not want to mirror that image. Coming back to our colorful little girl. You can have the file brought in, have it automatically centered. There are a lot of different things you can do for alignment. I only have one image. If I do a couple of these, I can have them aligned. I'm not going to go through them all, but center them on the left, center them on the right. See if I can get these smaller again, make it a little easier. So I'm just going to go through. You can see some of these things. If I click on them, it's just changing the orientation, that kind of thing. So just give you some options. I'm not going to go through and explain them all, but it's fairly easy to understand. If you just highlight over them, they are contextual, so it will kind of tell you what it's going to do. So far, is there any questions, Malia?
It looks like we don't have any just yet. You're a rock star through this.
Well, that's not always the case, but I thank you for that. Appreciate it. I'm just moving forward then. Our color settings. Color settings, whenever you do some printing, you're typically going to need some sort of color settings are where am I coming from and where am I going to kind of scenario. What I mean by that is if my photo itself is tagged as a certain type of RGB image, what is it tagged as? I'm sure you guys have heard about sRGB and maybe Adobe 1998. These are input profiles typically, and in the pre-press world, they also have some that are swap or Grackle based versus Adobe sRGB kind of scenario. So if my file comes in, I've always renamed this little checkbox right here. I call this, do I trust my customer checkbox? What do you mean by that is if they came through and said that this photo is sRGB and you should just print it as such, do I trust that they're actually knowing what they're talking about? Because sometimes people will say they're all sRGB or they're all Adobe 1998, and that may or may not be the case. If I do check this box, whatever that file is tagged in, as an example in Photoshop, you save a file out, it tags an image. If it tagged an image as sRGB, do I want to trust them that it is correct? If you don't trust them, you turn these off, and then you tell the RIP what it actually is. So it's kind of, as I mentioned, do I trust my customer? If I do, check the box. If I don't, I want to tell it that this is the scenario we're actually dealing with, so this is how you should deal with color on the input side. On the output side, so what we're doing is we're converting, if you think of it this way, we're converting Adobe 1998 to EPSON 6300 on our rigid media profile. And there are some different ones in there. Sometimes you'll see if you have different profiles set up. The reason we're only seeing one here is because we've only created one for that particular thickness of media. Sometimes you can have a couple of different ones if you have different thicknesses. If you do find that every print you do is a little off in a certain color, you can actually apply an overall color correction curve. So if I say my cyan is a little off, I need to do something with cyan. Once I do change this, you can see in the upper left, it is adding cyan into all those pictures and kind of ruining it if you see it that way. So I'm just gonna hit reset to clear that back to standard settings. So once again, converting what RGB or what CMYK to my printer paper combination. Under color replacement, yeah.
Going back to our layout settings really fast, Ron asked, could you elaborate on the left top position?
Okay, repeat that, under layout you said?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the top left position?
Yeah, the tab that says top left position. He wants you to kind of elaborate on that a little bit.
Okay, probably easiest way to do this is just do a visual. So I had about a 1/16 of an inch, let's just say 2 inches. Or actually, I'm going to get rid of the extra one so you can just see what's doing to one. So if I take the standard one, it starts at about a 1/16 of an inch in off the horizontal. If I make that, say, well, 5 inches should work. It's moving that image over 5 inches. I can do the same thing with the vertical. If I want to start my image 10 inches down, I can do just that. So it's manually typing in things. Reason you might see this is if for whatever reason, I want to make sure I have, if I'm doing, say, a coaster, which is fairly thick. If I take the paper and put on top of a coaster, do I want extra paper to make sure that the vacuum is done correctly all the way around the paper? So I might want to give myself a little of extra space. Now you saw I typed in those numbers, but what I'm doing now is I'm just dragging it around. So sometimes you want extra paper space, and sometimes you want to save as much as you can. Kind of depends on your actual workflow and your, to be honest, your substrate, and your substrate's going to probably do this more than anything else. Where this also might come in handy is if you were running a 44-inch roll of paper through a 44-inch wide calendar press. Well, if that paper is not perfect, I am gonna get some of my ink off of the paper or off of my printed fabric in that case. So I'd want to give myself a little bit of leeway, maybe left and right on the margins, so therefore, you know, I don't have to worry about the paper walking as it goes through that calendar press. Does that make sense? Hopefully.
That was actually perfect. He said, thank you so much for that.
Okay. Color replacement. This file doesn't really, it's kind of a photograph. Let's pull up the IT supplies logo and make this thing a little bigger so you guys can see it. So when I go into color replacement, I can take an edit and I can take an eyedropper. So I want to edit this color. And you see the color actually comes up. So we know that IT supplies red is, you know, 10 cyan, 100 magenta, 100 yellow, and no black in that color. If I actually go through and print it and realize, you know what, I don't like the actual color it is. I want to make it something different. What can I actually make it? So in the printer, it's actually using only 3.9% cyan ink because cyan is actually pretty dense. So these are the input colors at the top. It's converting it and using these values on the bottom because that's actually how much ink it actually takes to get that color. Now, the reason there's such a variance here is because it is dye sublimation. Dye sublimation colors or inks are completely different than pretty much any other kind of ink because you're not printing directly onto the surface. You're printing onto a transfer material and then sublimating. If anybody has ever looked at a piece of dye sublimation paper that's been printed on, you'd look at it and say, these colors are wrong, they're terrible, they're very subdued, they're flat. How am I ever going to get a bright blue out of that blue I see on the paper? But once you sublimate it, we all kind of sit back and say, how did that result come off of that paper? So don't worry about these inks down here being the values that they are as far as percentage is concerned compared to the top ones. But my point here is if I do want to take that logo and I want to bump up the cyan a little bit, say to 8%. If I do that, it would actually output the cyan just a little bit in the logo. So versus going back to the Illustrator or whatever the application designed it and actually corrected it. So just from one color to another, make this blue. You could also even say, well, I don't want the IT supplies logo to be red. I want it to be 80% blue and 0% magenta. And you can see it would actually make that change to a greenish color. Actually, if I wanted to be blue, it'd be different, higher. Anyways, I can go through and change that color is my point here. So not everybody goes through and does that, but we do give you the tool to edit individual colors. With marks, got too big again. See if I can bring that other one back. Let's make this a little smaller. Nice image though, very high res. Oops, going the wrong way. So with marks, not usually needed for dye sublimation, so I'm going to go through it pretty quickly, but there are some things that you can do on here. There's some different marks, and they're going to be very, very fine. See if I actually zoomed in on a corner. Yeah, it's not going to show it real well. But there are different types of marks. Think of it as their trim marks or cut marks for the actual file. And if I don't know where my actual image is, top left, but there it is. Okay. So you have different marks for that. You can see the trim marks. And probably a little bit better example if I would, can I do it this way? You can see them a little bit through there. I don't know if you guys can see this or not. It's pretty small. That's at the bottom of the image, but way down in the corner here, you can actually see the little marks that it's putting in. So that would be trim mark 1. There's a trim mark 2. So it changes the shape. So if you are printing and you want to know where to cut, that's kind of what it's there for. Job label is if you want to put a tagline at the bottom. So notice, really hard to see, really small on here. But when I did put job label, you can see that line is showing up and going away. So it's going to print a text line down at the bottom with the information you see listed here. You can also put in a comment, so printed, and that would then show up at the bottom of that that tagline as well. Some people do use this because it's easy to get one job mixed up with another job. Well, what file was this? What customer was it? That kind of thing. Which printer printed it? Was my left printer? Was it my right printer? My color came out bad. Well, why did it come out bad? Well, because you had the wrong media selected for that particular job. And then this would actually tell you what you used for that particular media. So kind of a cool, handy tool, but most people in dye sublimation don't do this, but they may put on some of the job labels, but typically not the marks. Let's take this back off because I don't want to have marks and labels.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
Can you increase the size of the job label, add registration marks to align on a substrate?
So again, I mean, as far as increasing the font size, or
I'm
where it
thinking
goes?
They're two separate questions. He's asking, can you increase the size of the job on the font size? Yes.
So the
And
font size is always going to be it's about a 12-point font.
Okay.
And no, you can't make that 40 points or anything like that.
And then can you add registration marks to align on the substrate?
Registration marks to a line?
To align, you align the registration marks so that the substrate will align on the paper, essentially, once they print it.
So let's get less than 20 inches and go back to the layout. So I get two of them. Now if I go to marks, there are marks on both of those images. Is that what they were asking?
Yep, he just wants to know so that he can lay out that they're on the paper so he can lay the substrate in the exact spot. So that looks good.
Yeah, what some people might use marks for, as an example, if you do happen to have a two-sided heat press where you're printing all over shirts, you're printing the front and the back at the same time, where you have heat on the top and the bottom of your shirt, some sort of marks are going to be required so you know that the image itself, will line up. So if you think about if I took my my image, I'm just going to cheat one of these here. Can't do that right now.
Mike, you know how when you're setting up a job, when we're using like a solvent unit or something like that, and they more so the registration marks are like a plus sign, or you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm talking about? That's what he's asking if this can do is set up those types of registration marks. Oh,
actual registration marks? Currently, they're just the trim marks, not the registration marks.
There we go. That answers the question.
So yeah, trim marks, not registration marks. Because really, well, if you look at what they are, let's see if I can zoom in on one. Just give me a moment here. So if you do look, there is a crosshair here. So it's kind of like a registration mark, but it's not a registration mark in the sense that this is a composite printer. It is not a separated file. We're not sending down cyan, then magenta, then yellow, then black. So that crosshair technically is not a registration mark, but it is still a crosshair. And I think that's probably the bigger thing they're looking for is that crosshair. So if I line up this crosshair with the crosshair of the back of the shirt, yeah, you could use it for that. I know it's a technical term, crosshair versus registration mark, but registration.
No, that's perfect. He said you just couldn't see it when it was further out. You couldn't really see it. So he said that works perfectly.
Okay, good. Got some technical questions. Excellent. Love those. Get back out here. And I'm going to get back to just one image. So after we do marks, going into cropping. Now, you might have seen me already go through. Now, what I can do here is if I have a file, I can't just click on it, so it kind of makes me take an extra step so I don't screw something up. So I can enable settings. Here I can drag and drop, or just drag to a certain point where I want to crop it. I can also force a certain area to be cropped. So let's just say, if I would undo that area, but I wanted to crop this to, say, 16 by 16 inches. But I wanted this to be, these are just gonna be guesses, but 1 inch over, 1 inch down. Okay, maybe 1.5 inches. You guys kind of got the idea. So there's a certain area you can crop it, and you just hit enter, and then it would actually apply that. But I'm going to disable it because I don't want to do it. And I don't think there's any questions on that because I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Tiling. Tiling is another feature we have to enable. I'm going to go through this really quick because I know nobody that's really doing tiling with dye sublimation because it just doesn't work real well because everything has to be pressed all at once. The only reason to do tiling is if you're going to print something, do an overlap, and then sew them together. So you will see it sometimes that way, but these are very, very large calendar press workflows typically, and very, very large files. So when you're, not that you're there now, but I've been at O'Hare Airport and they have somebody's done a display that's probably 12 feet high by 60 feet long. That is a scenario where you might have tiled that. So I'm taking my big file and I'm printing multiple sections. So tiling, when you get into it, you're tiling by a certain specific size. I need my file to be this big, and this is going to be typically a huge number, bigger than your calendar press. And I say calendar press because tiling on a flatbed press would be extremely difficult to get your image exactly straight every single time. Could it be possible? Yeah, but you're gonna swear a lot. Let's just put it that way. If you try doing it with a flatbed press, calendar press is really the only way to go if you're going to be doing any sort of tiling. I can do it by, I want to become a certain size, or I can just type in the actual dimensions here. When I do overlap, what amount or where do I want to overlap? Do I want to overlap my top position, my bottom, my left, or my right? So what area is going to be duplicated if you think of that on the next one? When you do duplicate it, how much is that going to overlap? So if I am doing things where I have to sew them together, I might want to give myself at least a ½ inch or to an inch so I can fold one over and I have something to actually, stitch it together with. Rotate even tiles 180 degrees. Reason for that is if I did have two images next to each other, just to say, for example, if this was a solid blue field and my heat press is not perfect, it's a little hotter on the right side because that's where the electricity comes in. If it's a little hotter, I might get a little darker blues on the right side than the left side. So if I am tiling, one image next to the next image, for argument's sake, let's just say it goes from light blue to dark blue, while the next one goes from light blue to dark blue also. If I rotate even files 180 degrees, the first one will go from light blue to dark blue, the second one will go from dark blue to light blue, and then so forth down the line. That way you don't see that harsh color change on a tile. A lot of times you'll see the same thing done for large tiling on solvent printers as well, or latex printers. Same reasons. Sometimes they print a little warmer on one side than they do on the other. Called personalities. Let's get that turned off because we're not doing it. Step and repeat sometimes does get done, especially in the dye sub industry, because let's just say you're doing a coaster and you want to have coasters, you want to have a lot of coasters. Actually, I'm going to go back and make this image small. So let's make our image a coaster. We're going to make it 4 inches. Very small. Okay. And I'm going to select that. Let's see if I can step and repeat. Actually, I'll come back. Just give me a moment here. I'm trying to figure out which way I want to go about doing this. For more time. Okay, so if I have my layout and I'm trying to do, say, 50 of these. So it gets very repetitive, very easy to cut, but sometimes people don't necessarily want it that way. So if you do go into the step and repeat function, you can actually do things where it would do an offset pattern. If I'm trying to do a, say, a 1/2 scenario. Come on, why is it not? It's showing me. See if I come back to lab, what do we see? I'm getting a little lag here, I apologize. But this should be giving us a, layout. We're gonna do a 40 by 100 feet, or 100 inches. Maybe not 1,000 inches, 100 inches. So if I take a lot of images, you can see here, if I go a lot of people do a 1/3 is very common. So therefore, if you look at it, it is stepping it out, and they're seamlessly one right after the other. If I didn't do that, then I would typically just get exactly what you see here. But sometimes people want to have that offset just a little bit. Makes it a little harder to cut. But if you do need to go it both ways, you can see kind of reversing it back out. So you can also change your starting point when your overlap amount if you are indeed overlapping. So kind of a neat little feature for doing stepping it out. But as I mentioned, a lot of people will do that and then they'll just do it instead. As you see, we did it kind of here. The reason they're so far apart is that still has marks on it. That's kind of why. Never changed it back.
Hey, Mike.
Because I have the, yes.
We have a question. Actually we have two. What is the purpose of offsetting with step and repeat?
Sometimes for design functionality, sometimes for consistency. If you have one, it breaks up the image a little bit. So sometimes, say if you were doing, if you're doing a curtain for a wall and you wanted to have a repeating pattern on the curtain, do you want your pattern to look like this? If say it's a flower on a curtain, you have little daisies being printed, you want, a daisy every 3 inches. Well, if you didn't want them an over and under situation, you actually might go through and do it through a step and repeat function instead, where you want that image to be, I'm doing a 40-inch wide curtain and it's 80, or was it 82 is common? Or is it 80? I haven't bought curtains in a while. So you might want that pattern to actually be a little bit of an offset. So the images are all there, but you kind of see this is going down, it's mixing it up a little bit. So that's why they might do something like that. So otherwise, what you'd have to do is you'd actually have to bring in a very large Illustrator file or Corel file, if that's your preference.
So he was saying it's essentially for larger designs, not really for individual prints for separate items.
Exactly. It might make more sense if we actually look at the IT Supplies logo. So let's just say you wanted to print IT Supplies curtains. So if I wanted to print IT Supplies curtains, would I want to have, that logo is pretty big. Let me go back here and change the size of it first off. Back to that. Let's make it 5. Okay. So if I had a very small logo and I wanted to make that out of curtains, if I just say I'm going to print 42 inches wide and I'm going to make that 100 inches long, do I want my curtains to look like that? Well, I might want to actually do them a little different and have them look at something like that. that make sense? Just a very easy, quick way
That
to make
was
adjustments.
perfect. That was actually perfect. And the
Yeah.
other question I had was, does this step and repeat come with the EPSON Edge software? Because most RIP softwares they have experienced has to be purchased as an add-on.
Everything I'm showing you is included in the RIP. No extra, there's no add-ons. Everything you see is what you get.
That's a good answer. We're ready to rock and roll.
Hey, let's take that a step further. The EPSON Edge software is on version 2.5. Someday 2.6 is going to come out. Guess how much it's going to cost the customer to upgrade?
How much?
Nothing.
Ooh,
Nothing.
I like
no
nothing.
service contracts, no monthly fees. It's yours.
It looks like the question, oh, another one came in. How long on the upgrade?
How long between upgrades?
Yeah, on the software, like how often, I guess, do EPSON do upgrades?
If I had to throw a number, I mean, there's no real hard line. You know, when we see, you know, bug fixes or updates or anything like that, you know, a new printer will become a new upgrade kind of scenario. Going back, I'll say we came out with version 2 of the RIP. We went from 2, well, there was iterations between them, but 2, 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 2.4, 2.5. And for reference, we're actually, I think, 2.50 right now, or 2.51 came out yesterday or the day before. Okay, there's actually an update since this even.
So how long will we get free upgrades is what I was just asked.
From 2 to 2 point whatever is all going to be free. I can't speak for 3 when that comes. I have no idea. So version 1 of the software was actually launched in Europe 4 years ago. The United States decided we did not want to support that product. We thought, you know, it just didn't have the features, the specs that we wanted or expected in the States. So we did not launch version 1.0 of the RIP. That did go through many iterations. Eventually they launched version 2 of the RIP about 9 months ago. So in the the version 1 went for 3+ years, and we're 9 months into version 2, and we're up to 2.5 currently. When is 3 coming? I have no idea. When is 2.6 coming? I have no idea. But I can tell you this, everybody that got in Europe, everybody that got version 1 got version 2 free. I can't say that's going to be the case going forward, but that is what happened in the past. What is also nice though is with EPSON Edge RIP, if you're on version 2.5 and you don't want to upgrade, but you have a question 5 years from now on your RIP, we're still answering the phone, we're still helping you out. So there is no give us your credit card before we talk to you. That's not the case.
You got a happy thank you out of that response.
So yeah, a certain RIP company is not real happy with us right now. I'll just leave it at that.
I can only imagine, Mike.
Okay, let's show you some kind of neat stuff. So all of the settings that we just went through for this file, I can actually go through, and in here under tools, we have something called presets. So a preset, so currently I have a preset for all of these different medias, and where these were picked up from, I'll show you when I bring a file in. So when I first brought a file in, probably didn't see it because I did it pretty quick. Let's take this image. Right down here, it says quick sets. See this? Way in the bottom? So what these quick sets are those preferences. So when I brought it in and said use a system quick set, it used the criteria that were aligned with that. We'll come back to this. So in here, if I go to manage presets, I can have a different, the presets are actually these quick sets right here. So if I have a quick set, I can I'm just going to add a new quick set, or I can copy an existing quick set. Let's just copy to make it a little simpler. And I'm going to call this one Junk Me. So that way, when I'm done using their computer, they can junk it. It's just for testing purposes. So that profile, I can go through and edit it. So that profile or that quick set, I'm actually going to be using my, let's just say I'm using my thick media at 100 GSM. I'm going to print that at 8 pass, high quality. This is for a Chromolux panel. So I want to print one and then cut one. I don't want to, so it's not going to be one long print. It's going to, if I print something at 6 inches, it's going to cut it at 6 inches kind of scenario. I can go through and do my layout. So I automatically scale it to a certain size, automatically move it horizontally or vertically. Remember everything that IT Supplies logo is printed backwards? That's because this was checked on import. If I was running a solvent printer, I would not want this checked on import. Color settings, and a lot of this is going to be familiar with what we've already gone through. You'll see just kind of a same thing, but in a different windows. Do I trust my customer checkbox? Remember that one? These are the color settings I had. I can go through, I have other settings. So when jobs are added, do I want to bring them in and have them ready to go, or do I want to put them on hold right away? Click. Do I want to share my quick sets as a shared printer? Do I want to add marks automatically? Do I want to do color replacement automatically? This area is kind of, I don't have a listing here right now, but if you always have a customer that has a, let's just say IT Supplies has a color called logo red. Well, the RIP is going to say, what is logo red? I have no idea. You can actually go through, I'll get to this in a few moments, and say, well, logo red is really Pantone 032 or Pantone 185 red. Either, they're both reds. So that's what spot color replacement is actually for. So take this color, make it into that color. So once I have those settings in there, you can actually go through. Color collection. This is where we their spot colors. They have a color called logo red. And I want to output that as a lab color. So I'm going to output that, testing my brain here for a second. 50, 30, 40, and not enough. I apologize, I'm not up on my lab color space. This color is going to be higher. This is going to be like 80. There. Okay, so that's the color I want IT Supplies red to always print as. So anytime it sees logo red, it's going to pick that up. So notice when I just added that logo red, I would need to come back to quick sets and find my junk me one, edit it. Come on, mouse, there we go. So under color replacement, now there's actually, I'm using the embedded, use the enabled groups, or I can say no. Whenever you see a color called, or for IT Supplies, I want IT Supply spot colors being used. So this is typically a setting that you can use for a specific paper. You could also use it for a specific customer. Customer A always gives me sky blue. What is sky blue? You know, it's this color. So you can go through in some other settings as well. My media settings, my minimum margins. This is kind of where I was talking about being real tight at the edge of your paper. I want to force more white space, or I don't want to allow myself to print, you know, to lay down images that are 44 inches wide on 44-inch paper. I want to limit myself to 42 inches wide on 44-inch paper. So I'd want to give this, I mean, it's in millimeters now, but I would give this a, you know, a 1 inch right, 1 inch left in that scenario. The quick set's pretty cool. And manage printing information. These are actually your different medias. So for someone, and most people aren't going to get into this, but I know Jim at IT definitely would want to get into this area. This is where you can actually go through and sometimes create your own custom ICC profiles, your different settings and that kind of thing. So more custom color workflow. I'm not going to go into that. If you have questions, I'm sure somebody at IT, hint, hint, can help you, direct you in that one. So kind of neat that bringing that in. When you are, there is also EPSON Edge Dashboard. I don't know if this is hooked up, so this is kind of a test right now. Okay. It has been hooked up, but the printer is actually offline. What EPSON Edge Dashboard does is it lets you select a certain printer. Yeah, I'm testing out of a remote location, so I apologize. But what this does is it helps monitor your actual printers. My ink is doing this, my printer is ready, the sign is low. It also lets you control for importing new profiles if there is a new profile. A lot of that also will be done directly through RIP updates as far as the new profiles are concerned, but you want to know, let's see if I can get this to go. Yeah, I'm not getting it because, as I mentioned, these have to be physically connected, and I'm an hour away from the building, so hopefully if you have questions, we can cover that later, or somebody can, but fairly straightforward. Once you get the file the way you want it to look, you hit print and it rips and prints and starts printing. I've pretty much gone through what I would like to go through, but I'd love to answer questions if you guys have more.
I have a question for you. How many printers can I run on this software?
4. So currently supported, and this is, okay, this is a gray area. You know, I'll explain that in a second. 4 printers. So if I have 4 6370s, one RIP will run all 4 of them. If I have an F6370 and a 9470, I can have 2 of each. No problems. In the United States, North America, Canada included, we are supporting in version 2 the F6370, the 9470, the 9470H, which is the fluorescent version. In the RIP itself, it is possible to install some other printers that are from EPSON. The reason I say it's possible, Europe launched this product originally with solvent printers. So in Europe, you will see that they support the S80 as an example, because they launched that when the product launched itself. With our solvent printers, we are still bundling those with Onyx RIPs. We are not bundling with this RIP. Technically, you could install it. It will probably work quite well, but don't call us for any types of questions at all, because we don't support it as far as that hardware with this software, because frankly, we've never really tested it that much in the United States. So if you call up with questions, we just don't have the time invested in the solvent printers on this RIP. We do have the time invested on the dye sub printers on this RIP. Hopefully that makes sense. So in theory, I could have a 6370, a 9470, a 9470H, and an S40. Don't call with questions on the S40 though. Why is my color wrong? Don't call. We're not gonna help you with that. Why is my color wrong on my 63? That will answer.
Perfect. I had 2 more come in. Can I have the RIP on more than one computer, and does it require a security dongle?
Okay, dongle? No. But when you buy a 6370 or any of those printers, the 6370, the 9470s, or the 9470H, you are going to get, and I'm not going to go into this, but I'll explain it, but I'm not going to go into it. Under this little tab right here is license. Everybody gets, when they buy the printer, they get a license. That license can be installed on this computer. Like right now, we're running on one of their laptops in the office at IT Supplies. If the person goes into this license area, deactivates the license, in other words, they release the license, if you think of it that way. Now I could use that same license and install it on my computer. So IT Supplies might have one in their demo room that they use for doing demos, but then they go to a trade show. They want to use that RIP while they're at a trade show on a different laptop. So they can go through, deactivate it on computer 1, and activate it on computer 2. I can't run computer 1 and 2 at the same time. So what happens is when the RIP does launch, it does go out to the internet and say, are you the, A, is this license valid? B, are you the only person using this license? So can I use it on more than one computer? Technically, but not at the same time. That was probably really your question. And as I said, you can use it on up to 4 different printers. Hopefully that answered it.
That sounds good to me.
I'm not going into license because I don't want to show your license. That's why I'm not going any further.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So we got some more. Do you need a separate Edge license or option to enable creating custom calibrations and profiles?
Okay. Currently, the EPSON Edge RIP has profiles in it that are designed for hard surface and soft surface. And for all of our different medias. Now there's differences, not huge differences, but there are differences. If I look between a, let's just say a Chromolux panel and a Universal Woods piece of a table or a coaster. Very similar results, but they are a little different. 99% of the population out there, well, I'll say at least 95% of the population doesn't care. So the profiles that we're going to give you on the EPSON Edge RIP are going to be pretty darn good right out of the gate. But you are going to get some customers that are very picky, and they will say, I want them perfect. These are typically where, you know, at IT Supplies, Jim will get involved in that custom color situation. The RIP doesn't really, at this point in time, allow custom profiles being imported. If you are to that level, you're probably going to be wanting more control than this RIP even gives you as far as color management is concerned. So a different RIP might be a better option if you are that particular with color. As an example, if your business is doing 4 foot by 8 foot photographic metal panels and you need neutral colors to be neutral, there's better options out there than this. I hate to talk down about my product, but it's not here. We're not going to replace the high-end RIPs of the world. There's definitely some reasons for them out there. This is going to be, you know, we're hitting that 95% of the population with a bundled RIP. It's a great solution, but it's not the cure-all for everybody.
Right. So it looks like I don't have any right now. I'll start to wrap it up and let anyone else that has some questions get in there. But I do want to thank you so much, Mike. This was really great information. Again, at this time, if there's anybody who has any other additional questions, you can put them in there and I'll answer them right after this. While we wait for those questions to appear, I do just want to take a little time to talk about IT Supplies. As many of you know, IT Supplies is here to support your needs for everything related to the perfect print. Our knowledgeable staff and technical support specialists are here to help you with supplies and support to keep your business running. In addition, we are posting daily videos on our YouTube channel to help with many of your commonly asked questions. Please contact your sales representative for any assistance you may need. If you don't know how to contact your rep, you can do so by calling 800-771-9665 and ask for a commercial sales specialist. We are here to help you and your business succeed. To go back to more questions, I did get one more. Is it a neutral color issue? Would solid colors be an issue on this RIP? Mike.
No, solid colors shouldn't. Yeah, can you hear me? I had muted a while. Am I back
live? Yeah,
you're
good now.
Okay. Solid colors shouldn't be an issue. The printer is more than capable of doing that. With solid colors, typically we have more problems, to be honest, with paper cockling on hard surfaces or consistency of a heat press. So the printer lays down very, very even tones. I mean, if you're just doing a field of blue, the printer is more than capable of printing a very even field of blue. The question is did you go too cheap on the paper to say, I'm trying to be rude, but very thin paper has a higher tendency of wrinkling. So if I do have hills and valleys on the print, sometimes that will affect the print quality. The sharpness. I'll get sharp line, then I'll get, the hill might be sharp, the valley might be blurry, which would look uneven when it's sublimated. A thicker paper would help that, because it's not going to have as many hills and valleys because it's not soaking as much. Same thing with a heat press. Some heat presses are warmer on one side than the other on a calendar press. If you're looking at a flat press, it might be warmer on the right side in the front versus the back side in the left. So is that a printing issue? No, but it's still something you have to be aware of. It's still a possibility. So, to say, yeah, we guarantee everything's gonna be perfect, I can't guarantee the other side of it. But the printer itself is pretty consistent.
And the other question is, you mentioned 4x8 photo prints. Why is it more difficult for a RIP to handle than a smaller photo print?
It's not that it's more difficult. Well, okay, anybody it's not that it's more difficult as far as actual printing process is concerned. I mean, our RIP can print a big file just the same as another RIP can do a big file. But when you get somebody that's doing the 4x8 metal panel, first off, they're not doing it on a 6370, they're doing on like a 7200. And they're buying a heat press that is probably north of $60,000 or $70,000 for that heat press. Or it's a custom made press. I've seen some well over $100,000 for that heat press. The customer that purchases that heat press has expectations beyond, because these panels are selling quite often for over $1,000 each. And the people that are looking at these panels critique them down to the nth degree. My flesh tones look a tint warm, redo it. Oh, or that's not the color of the sky I was expecting, redo it. It's a very expensive process. Things have to be perfect the first time. So this is typically where somebody will hire a color expert to come in and create custom profiles for their exact workflow. Because if, for example, just to keep it real simple, if I have two heat press companies, Company A, Company B, both making 4x8 heat presses, one company is hotter than the other company. If one company has a heat press that's hotter than the other company, it's shifting color. So if one is printing warmer, one is printing red and one is printing blue, if you think of it that way, a generic profile down the middle is not going to make people happy. That customer is going to need someone to create a custom profile for their printer, their heat press. So I said, it's not that the printer can't print well, it's just that we're talking about custom installations, custom color configurations at that point in time. So there you're spending, a couple of grand on a software, but you're probably spending more on contracting services than you are actually on your software RIP. You're going to spend more to have that professional come in and make it perfect. And Jim's excellent. I'm referring to Jim a couple times. Jim's an employee at IT.
He's our color guru. So it looks like that is all the questions so far. And that concludes, it's so bittersweet for us right now. That concludes our webinar series, Knowledge is Power. Again, thank you so much, Mike Moon, for coming on and doing this remotely too. That was pretty awesome. Be on the lookout for more information on new series, videos, and much, much more. Thank you so much to all of our attendees. You have been tremendous. And have a great rest of your day, you guys, and welcome to the weekend.
Thanks, everybody. Be safe out there.
Thanks so much for watching this. If you would like to see more of these videos, please go to our YouTube channel.